I've never believed in ghosts. Call me a skeptic, but the idea of spectral entities wandering the earth always seemed like fodder for overactive imaginations. This skepticism remained unchallenged until that fateful autumn evening when my friends dragged me into what was touted as the most authentic ghost tour in our small town. Our town, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, was picturesque, the kind of place you'd see on postcards. Quaint houses lined cobblestone streets, and every building had a story, most stretching back centuries. History was the town's pride, and naturally, ghost stories were a significant part of that heritage. The ghost tour was famous. Tourists flocked from all over to walk the dimly lit streets, led by a guide who promised a chilling journey through the town's haunted past. My friends, Lily and Ethan, had been pestering me for weeks to join them. "Come on, Reggie," Lily had said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "It's just for fun. Plus, you'll finally get to debunk all those ghost stories." Despite my reluctance, their enthusiasm was infectious. So, there I was, standing under the flickering street lamp at the designated meeting spot, surrounded by a small crowd of thrill seekers and ghost enthusiasts. The tour guide arrived precisely at 8 p.m., emerging from the shadows like a character from an old war film. He was tall, dressed in period clothing that looked like it belonged in a museum, a long, dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his eyes, and a cane that clicked rhythmically against the cobblestones. His appearance was so theatrically perfect it was almost comical. "Good evening, brave souls," he began, his voice echoing slightly, as if it carried the weight of centuries. "I am your guide to the unseen and unspoken secrets of this town. Follow me, and keep close. The spirits are restless tonight." I exchanged an eye roll with Ethan as we set off into the night. The tour was exactly what I expected: dramatic storytelling, historical tidbits, and an eerie atmosphere enhanced by the guide's theatrical flair. Yet, something about the guide felt off. His movements were too fluid, his skin almost translucent under the dim streetlights. His knowledge of the town's history was impressively detailed, extending beyond well-known facts. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this tour than met the eye. But ghosts? No, that was impossible. Or so I thought. As the night deepened, so did the sense of unease that clung to the edges of my skepticism. The guide led us through winding streets, his voice never wavering, his stories never faltering. Each tale was more chilling than the last, filled with tragic deaths and unexplained phenomena. It was when we stopped in front of an old Victorian mansion. Its windows, he spoke of a young woman, Sarah, who had died under mysterious circumstances, her spirit said to still roam the halls. As he spoke, a chill ran down my spine, not from the story, but from the way he told it. His eyes, previously hidden under the brim of his hat, met mine. They were piercing blue, transparent and deep, like pools of water under moonlight. His gaze held mine, and for a moment, I felt as though he was reaching into the depths of my soul. "Eerie, isn't it?" Ethan whispered, snapping me out of my trance. "He's really good." "Yeah, a little too good," I muttered, still unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The guide continued, leading us to a cemetery on the outskirts of town. The graves, worn by time, stood like silent sentinels under the moonlit sky. As we walked among the tombstones, the guide's voice took on a somber tone. "Many souls rest here, their stories etched in stone and memory," he said, gesturing to the graves. "But some stories are never told, lost to time and silence." It was then that I noticed it, the faintest hint of a whisper, so soft it was almost lost in the wind. I turned, searching for the source, but found nothing. The others seemed oblivious, hanging on to the guide's every word. My heart pounded in my chest, my skepticism warring with the mounting evidence of my senses. The guide's knowledge, his ethereal presence, the unexplainable whispers, it was all becoming too much to dismiss. As we left the cemetery, I couldn't help but feel that we were being followed, that unseen eyes were watching us from the darkness. The night, once an exciting adventure, had turned into something unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were part of a story much larger and more sinister than any of us could have imagined. The deeper we ventured into the heart of the town, the heavier the air felt, as if charged with an unseen energy. The guide's tales grew darker, delving into the tragic fates of those who once walked these streets. His voice, a haunting echo in the still night, wove a tapestry of loss and despair that seemed almost too real. At one point, as we stood outside an abandoned theater, the guide described a famous actress who had vanished without a trace. As he spoke, a shadow flickered across the stage, visible through the dusty windows. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Ethan and Lily didn't seem to notice, their faces a mix of fascination and fear. I started to feel a growing connection between the guide and the stories he told. It was as though he wasn't just a storyteller, but a part of the story himself. His descriptions of the past were laced with a sense of longing and regret that seemed too genuine to be mere performance. "Did you see that?" Lily whispered to me, pointing to a second-story window of the theater. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure peering down at us, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Yeah, I saw it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The skepticism I had clung to was slowly eroding, replaced by a sense of dread and curiosity. The guide led us to the oldest part of town, where the buildings were so ancient they seemed to groan under the weight of their own history. Here, the air was colder, and the sense of being watched was more pronounced. As we walked, the guide's form seemed to flicker, like an old film struggling to stay on the reel. I blinked hard, not trusting my eyes. But when I looked again, I saw him pass through a closed gate as if it weren't there. My heart skipped a beat, and I exchanged a startled look with my friends. The realization hit us all at once: the guide was no ordinary man. He was a ghost, a spirit tethered to this town and its stories. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of fear and awe. The guide stopped in front of a dilapidated house, its windows boarded up, its walls scarred by time. He turned to face us, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in his transparent eyes. "This house holds a story dear to me," he began, his voice softer, more reflective. "A story of love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds of the soul." As he recounted the tale of a young couple torn apart by tragedy, his words seemed to hang in the air, imbued with a sorrow that was almost palpable. The story ended with the couple's untimely death, their spirits set to linger in the house, forever searching for each other. The guide's connection to the story was undeniable. It was as if he was reliving his own memories, not just recounting folklore. The line between past and present blurred, and the chill of the night seeped into my bones. We were no longer just spectators on a ghost tour. We had become part of a world where the veil between the living and the dead was thinning, where every shadow held a story, and every whisper was a voice from the past. The realization was terrifying, yet I couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. The world was far more mysterious and complex than I had ever imagined. The night air grew colder as we reached the climax of our ghostly journey. The guide led us to the edge of town, to an area I had never ventured before. Here, the buildings were so old they seemed to lean under the weight of time, their windows like dark unblinking eyes. We stopped in front of a crumbling stone wall, overgrown with ivy, that encircled what appeared to be an ancient graveyard. The headstones were weathered and worn, their inscriptions nearly erased by the passage of years. "This is where our tour concludes," the guide said, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "But before you leave, I have one last story to share." He led us through the rusted iron gate into the graveyard. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with an unspoken history. As we moved among the graves, the guide spoke of the souls buried here, each with their own tragic tale. It was here, amidst the whispers of the dead, that he revealed his true nature. "I, like those who rest here, am a spirit of this town," he confessed, his form shimmering in the moonlight. "We guides are the echoes of its past, bound to these grounds by our unresolved stories." A hush fell over us. The revelation was unnerving, yet it made a bizarre kind of sense. The guide's knowledge, his ethereal presence, it all pointed to the truth we had been unwilling to see. It was then that the air grew even colder, and a sense of foreboding filled the graveyard. The guide's face darkened, and he turned towards a neglected corner of the graveyard. "But not all spirits are as benign as we," he warned. "Some linger in anger and torment." As his words hung in the air, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was a ghost, but unlike our guide, its presence was menacing, its form twisted by rage. The air around it seemed to warp and shiver, as if corrupted by its malevolence. We stood frozen, terror gripping our hearts. The malevolent spirit let out a bone-chilling wail, a sound of such despair and anger that it seemed to resonate with the very stones beneath our feet. The guide stepped forward, positioning himself between us and the dark spirit. "You must leave, now," he urged, his voice urgent. "This spirit is bound by pain and cannot be reasoned with. Go, while you still can." Panic set in, and we turned to flee, but the path back to the gate was obscured by a swirling mist that seemed to rise from the very ground. The malevolent spirit advanced, its form flickering with shadows and malice. In that moment, I realized the guide's story was far more than a tale of the past. It was a warning, a glimpse into the unseen world that existed alongside our own. We were caught in a struggle that transcended life and death, witnesses to the tormented souls of the town's forgotten past. The guide stood his ground, facing the dark spirit with a sorrowful determination. It was clear he was trying to protect us, to give us a chance to escape the wrath of a spirit consumed by its own despair. As we navigated through the mist and gravestones, trying to find our way out, the guide's words echoed in my mind. We were part of this story now, a story of ghosts and the unquiet dead, where the past was never truly gone, and the spirits of those who once walked these streets lingered, caught between worlds. In the thickening mist, disoriented and frightened, we scrambled through the graveyard, the malevolent spirit's wails echoing behind us. The guide's spectral figure clashed with the dark entity, a dance of light and shadow amidst the gravestones. His bravery gave us the precious moments we needed to escape, but the path to safety was obscured, the familiar landmarks of the graveyard hidden by the swirling fog. Ethan grabbed my arm, pulling me toward what he hoped was the direction of the gate. Lily followed closely, her breaths coming in short gasps. The cold seemed to seep into our bones, making every movement a struggle against an unseen force. As we stumbled through the graveyard, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift slightly. The guide's efforts were buying us time, but the malevolent spirit's presence still loomed over us, a palpable force of anger and sorrow. "Here." The gate. Ethan shouted, relief evident in his voice. The rusted iron gate emerged from the mist, a gateway back to the world we knew. We pushed through it, leaving the confines of the graveyard and the supernatural battle behind us. Once outside the graveyard, the normalcy of the town seemed surreal, a stark contrast to the terror we had just experienced. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the well-lit streets, the echoes of the night's horrors still ringing in our ears. As we caught our breath, the realization of what had just happened began to sink in. The ghostly guide, the malevolent spirit, the truths revealed, it was a lot to process. The guide's story, his connection to the town, and his final act of protection, painted a picture of a spirit not bound by malice, but by a sense of duty and unresolved tragedy. He was trying to help us, Lily said, her voice a mix of awe and fear. He was protecting us from that thing. Yeah, I agreed, my mind racing. But why? Why is he still here? And what was that other spirit? We were left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The ghost tour was more than a simple attraction. It was a window into the unseen world, a world where the past lingered and spirits walked among us. The night had changed us. Our brush with the supernatural had opened our eyes to possibilities we had never imagined. The guide's story was no longer just a tale, it was a part of our own story now, a chapter in our lives that would never be forgotten. As we made our way back home, the streets empty and quiet, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for the guide. In his own way, he was a guardian of the town's history, a keeper of its forgotten stories. And though we had escaped the malevolent spirit, I wondered about the fate of the guide, left to face the darkness alone. The sun rose over the town the next morning, casting a warm golden light on the streets that had been the stage for our nocturnal ordeal. Life resumed its usual rhythm, with people going about their daily routines, unaware of the shadows that lurked beneath the surface of our quaint town. I walked through the town, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of the hidden world we had encountered. The old Victorian mansion, the abandoned theater, the ancient graveyard, all these places now held a deeper meaning, a connection to the spectral realm we had briefly entered. The ghost tour was suspended indefinitely, the guide nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled about what had happened that night, but none came close to the truth we had experienced. Ethan, Lily, and I kept the story to ourselves, a shared secret that bonded us in a way nothing else could. As I passed the graveyard, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. The guide, with his tragic past and his duty to the town's spirits, had been a part of this place, a link to his history. I wondered if he had found peace, or if he still wandered the streets, a ghost among ghosts. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes in the town. There was a quietness, a sense of watchfulness, as if the events of that night had awakened something long dormant. I could feel the eyes of the unseen on me, a reminder that the world was far more complex than I had ever imagined. One evening, as I walked home, I passed the old Victorian mansion. In the fading light, I thought I saw a figure in the window, a glimpse of the guide, his ethereal form looking out over the town he was bound to protect. For a moment, our eyes met, and then he was gone, a whisper in the wind. The experience changed my perspective on life and the mysteries that lie beyond our understanding. The town, with its hidden history and its ghostly inhabitants, was a place where the past and present intertwined, where stories of love, loss, and longing echoed through the streets. The ghost tour may have been just an attraction for tourists, but for us, it was a journey into the unknown, a glimpse into a world where the veil between life and death was thin. And though the tour was no more, the spirits of the town remained, their stories etched in the stones of the graveyard and the walls of the old buildings. As I continued my walk, the town's normalcy seemed like a facade, a thin veneer over a world of shadows and whispers. The guide, and the other spirits we had encountered, were still out there, a part of the town's tapestry of history and mystery.